everyone, welcome back to Study Hat. And in today's lesson, we'll be looking at composition writing, focus on content skills. So for our objectives, we'll be learning how to understand to use the pictures to complete the story and being able to plan the story effectively. We're going to look at these three pictures where the final picture is actually blanked out. And for you as a student, you're supposed to write about the pictures in the worksheet based on the sequence given, as well as providing your own conclusion. So for the topic, we'll be actually doing a horrible discovery at the restaurant. So we have here 4 pictures, with the 4th picture being blank. So typically in your own examination, you will face this very similar type of question. Sometimes you may be given a 4th picture, but at this level, you should be able to make your own conclusion on your own. And once you're ready, we'll move on. Alright, so planning a composition, where we follow the sequence provided, we should also look at following a certain flow, as well as showing a clear beginning, middle, and ending. And by being able to demonstrate how one event leads to another, it creates a very clear, a very smooth flow in the composition. So how exactly do we plan a composition? Well, what we do is actually follow the mountain method, which splits the planning into 5 parts. Firstly is the introduction, where we look at the characters and the setting. The rising action, which are the events that lead to the climax. The climax itself, which shows the most important and the most exciting part of the story. Here is where the problem or the situation usually occurs. The falling action, how is the situation resolved? Or what are the consequences of the situation? And lastly, the conclusion. How do we tie up this composition? And how do we end it nicely? So let's get started. We're actually going to try out the introduction right now and see how we can plan it according to the first picture. So as mentioned, introduction looks at the characters and the setting. So in this case, if we refer to picture 1, we know that characters can be whatever you name them. For in this case, I'll name them Billy and Susie. And they're with both their parents and grandparents. And they're actually at a restaurant, and they are celebrating their grandfather's birthday. So the next part's a rising action and describes a very small events that lead to the climax. And this is important because we need to know what had happened before the most important of the story, or what were the things that happened for the climax to occur. So in this case, the waiter is serving dishes to the group. And in this event, what we can do in our own stories mention events like Billy and Susie and their family were starving. Their parents called the waiter over to serve the food, and the waiter served the dishes professionally. So we use these 3 events to have a very clear sequence and to not suddenly jump from one point to another. One thing we should avoid in composition is sudden jumps, because it doesn't show any form of development, nor does it show that you have a clear understanding of how you would like your composition to flow. Now, the most exciting part is the climax. And this is definitely the most important of the story, and at this point we usually describe the problem that occurs. So the problem is mentioned in picture 3, where one of the adults takes out a bug from his plate. So we usually split up into 2 parts. Event 1, where let's say this is actually happening, where father spotted something crawling on his plate, and he realized that it was a live bug. Now we'll go into the falling action, which shows the consequences as well as how it was solved. So picture 4 is blank, so you actually have to provide the ending, or rather this part of your story, on your own. This is a great way to show that you have a clear understanding of how the composition should flow and whether how you've continued the story makes sense. So we can split up in a few events as well. Firstly, father called the waiter over to show the bug, and the waiter was very apologetic and took back all of the dishes. The new dishes were served to the family. Finally, we're at the conclusion, and the conclusion is where we tie up the whole composition. And we actually provide very important points, like link to topic, feelings, and lesson learned. We can continue it in picture 4 as well. Sometimes picture 4 is the conclusion or it's just the following action. In this case, we'll just consider it as the final event where the whole family left the restaurant feeling upset about the incident. And what we do is that we can link to topic, which is the horrible discovery. So we write down they did not expect to make such a horrible discovery at that restaurant. It's good if we write down the feelings as well. We don't have to write down feelings of all characters. We can just group up the feelings or focus on the main character. In this case, I've actually grouped up all their feelings to show that they were glad that the restaurant was understanding enough. And lastly, the lesson learned. What do you think the characters can learn from this particular situation? So we can put here to be more careful when eating. Let's try a quick activity here. Compositions have many different ways on which we can continue, especially if we have a blank picture for picture 4. So at this point, students can engage their own creativity and imagination to see what kind of ways can we continue after the third picture. Pause here and think about these 2 questions. You can note down about 2 points for each one. And once you're ready, we'll just go through some possible answers. Once again, there are no right or wrong answers when it comes to composition. We just have to make sure it's as relevant and as comprehensible as possible. So what are some ways that we can continue? We can say Billy and Susie felt sick and did not want to eat anymore. So the family did not even continue eating there, so did not accept the new dishes. Or we can even find other ways to resolve the composition. For example, the manager told them they did not have to pay for the bill. So instead of having new dishes served to them, like we've done in the previous story, we can actually just say that, oh, they are no longer keen to eat there, so the manager actually waived the bill for them. What I'd like you to do is to look at the following 5 paragraphs, or rather key sentences from 5 paragraphs. And I want you to think about which part of the planning would they actually fall under. Would they be under the introduction, or the rising action, or even the conclusion? So pause here and answer each statement with which part of the plot planning they will fall under. And once you're ready, you can move on to the next part. Alright, great. So for the statements, first statement, we know that Sammy was frolicking in the cool swimming pool. So this tells us a character and the setting. So it will be the introduction. Sammy was thankful that the lifeguard had saved her because we have some feelings here, we have some gratitude. We will most likely put this in the conclusion. Sammy decided to race against her brother to the end of the pool. So these were the events that occurred before the climax had happened. Sammy was pulled out of the water. This is how the problem was solved. And lastly, Sammy experienced a terrible leg cramp and could not keep herself afloat. This tells us that this is the main problem. So when we look at the 5 sentences, we should be able to understand what is needed for each part of the plot planning. And that's it for today's lesson on composition writing, content skills. Don't forget to have a go at the quiz right after this, and I'll see you in the next video.